Marcus Chen wiped grease from his hands with a dirty rag, the sound of hovercars passing overhead barely registering in his mind anymore. The small repair shop on level 47 of New Geneva Station attracted little attention, which was exactly how he preferred it. Most customers didn't look twice at the quiet human mechanic who fixed their broken atmospheric processors and malfunctioning gravity generators with surprising skill. They had no idea that those same hands had once wielded the quantum blade that cut through the heart of the Void Emperor's flagship. They couldn't know that the man hunched over their damaged equipment had stood alone against the Shadow Armada when all hope seemed lost. To them, Marcus was just another human trying to make a living in the sprawling multicultural hub that served as neutral territory between the major galactic powers. The door chimed as a Zilithian merchant entered, her scaled skin reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. She dragged behind her a smoking atmospheric recycler, its warning lights blinking angry red. Marcus looked up from the plasma torch he was cleaning, noting the desperation in her vertical pupils. "Can you fix this?" she asked, her translator collar rendering her hissing speech into standard galactic. "Every other shop on this level turned me away. They say it's too damaged beyond repair." Marcus approached the device, running his fingers along its scarred metal housing. Blast marks indicated weapons fire, probably from pirates or raiders. Inside the casing, he could see that the quantum resonance chamber had been cracked, its delicate crystalline structure fractured in a way that most technicians would consider impossible to repair. "I can fix it," he said simply, already calculating the precise adjustments needed to realign the quantum field generators. "But it'll take 3 days and the parts won't be cheap." The Zilithian's head crest drooped. I don't have much credit. My cargo ship was attacked near the Kepler void. They took everything valuable, but they left this broken recycler behind. Without it, my crew will suffocate before we reach the next station." Marcus studied her face, seeing past the alien features to the genuine fear beneath. During the war, he had learned to read desperation in a dozen different species. He had seen that same look in the eyes of refugees fleeing the advancing Shadow Fleet, civilians whose worlds had been consumed by the living darkness that turned entire star systems into empty voids. "I'll do it for the cost of parts," he said, already moving toward his tool cabinet. "No labor charge." The Zilithian's eyes widened. "But why?" "You don't even know me." Marcus paused, his hand resting on a quantum calibrator that had once been standard issue for the human. Colonial fleet. Few beings in the galaxy knew that. Humans had developed the most advanced quantum manipulation technology during their desperate fight for survival. Even fewer knew that a single human had turned that technology into something that could destroy the seemingly invincible Shadow Lords. "Because everyone deserves a chance to go home," he said, the words carrying weight from memories he tried to keep buried. As he began disassembling the recycler, Marcus allowed his mind to drift back 15 years. The Shadow War had been humanity's first real test on the galactic stage. Most species had written off the young race as another civilization doomed to fall before the advancing darkness. The Shadow Lords had consumed entire sectors, their living ships turning matter itself into void, leaving behind empty space where once thriving worlds had existed. Humanity had surprised everyone by not just surviving the initial assault, but pushing back. While other species fell back to fortified positions or fled to distant galaxies, human fleets had pressed forward into the growing darkness. They had studied their enemy, learned from each defeat, and adapted their technology in ways that the more established galactic powers found reckless and impossible. Marcus had been just another colonial fleet officer then, specializing in quantum field manipulation. He had watched as his captain, Admiral Sarah Morrison, had sacrificed her entire fleet to buy time for Earth's evacuation. He had stood on the bridge of the last human dreadnought as it made its final, desperate charge into the heart of the Shadow. Emperor's domain. The irony wasn't lost on him that he now spent his days fixing the mundane problems of beings who lived in the peace his sacrifice had bought. The atmospheric recycler's quantum chamber required the same fundamental understanding of reality that had allowed him to destabilize the Shadow Emperor's dimensional anchor. The difference was that then, he had been trying to destroy something that threatened all life in the galaxy. Now he was trying to help one frightened merchant make it home safely. He worked in silence, his movements precise and economical. The quantum resonance patterns were complex, but his hands moved with the confidence of someone who had once calibrated weapons capable of tearing holes in space-time itself. Within hours, he had the chamber rebuilt and the field generators perfectly aligned. The Zilithian watched him work with growing amazement. "You're very skilled for a level 47 mechanic," she observed. "Where did you learn quantum field manipulation like this?" "Here and there," Marcus replied, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. As he tested the recycler's systems, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in its polished surface. The face looking back at him was older, marked by lines that hadn't been there during the war. His brown hair had begun to show gray at the temples, and his eyes held a weariness that came from carrying secrets too heavy to share. The recycler hummed to life, its readings showing perfect atmospheric conversion efficiency. The Zilithian stared at the display in disbelief. This is better than factory specifications. How is that possible?" Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "Sometimes you can improve on the original design if you understand the underlying principles well enough." He handed her the device, noting how her scaled hands trembled slightly as she took it. In her gratitude, he saw an echo of the countless beings who had benefited from humanity's victory over the Shadow Lords, most of whom would never know the true cost of their continued existence. "Thank you," she whispered, her translator barely able to convey the emotion in her voice. "You've saved my crew." After she left, Marcus returned to his workbench, picking up the plasma torch he had been cleaning. Tomorrow would bring more customers, more broken machines, more small problems that he could solve with skills earned in humanity's greatest hour. It was a quiet life, an anonymous life, but it was enough. He had ended the darkness that threatened to consume the galaxy. Now he was content to be a nobody who helped people get home safely. 3 weeks after the Zilithian merchant's visit, Marcus noticed the surveillance. It was subtle at first, a Korthak security officer lingering too long near his shop window, a human in expensive clothes who ordered coffee at the cafe across the street and stayed for hours while reading the same news feed. Most people wouldn't have spotted the pattern, but Marcus had spent years learning to identify hostile observation during the war. He continued his routine without acknowledging the watchers, repairing hover drones and recalibrating gravity generators while mentally cataloging every face that appeared too frequently in his peripheral vision. On the 4th day, a woman entered his shop during the lunch rush when the corridor outside was crowded with workers from the upper levels. She was tall, with the distinctive pale skin and silver hair of someone from the Centauri colonies, but her eyes held an intelligence that made Marcus immediately cautious. She wore civilian clothes, but her posture and the way she scanned the room before speaking marked her as military or intelligence. "Mr. Chen?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "My name is Director Voss. I represent certain interests within the Galactic Council." Marcus didn't look up from the environmental processor he was testing. "I fix machines. If yours is broken, put it on the counter. If not, there's the door." Director Voss smiled, apparently unsurprised by his response. "We're not here about repairs. We're here because someone has been asking questions about the Shadow War, specifically about what happened to Commander Marcus Chen of the human colonial fleet." The plasma readings on Marcus's diagnostic scanner spiked as his hand involuntarily tightened on the device. He forced himself to remain calm, checking the recycler's output levels with exaggerated attention to detail. "Never heard of him," Marcus said. "Common name, Chen. Probably hundreds of them in the old fleet records." "Interesting," Voss replied, moving closer to his workbench. "Because according to our intelligence, Commander Chen was the one who penetrated the Shadow Emperor's dimensional fortress. He was the one who destabilized the void core that powered their entire invasion fleet. The official records say he died in the explosion that ended the war." Marcus finally looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "If he's dead, why are you bothering a mechanic on level 47? Voss reached into her jacket, causing Marcus to tense before she produced a small hollow projector. The device activated, displaying a 3-dimensional image of a massive black ship emerging from what looked like a tear in space itself. The vessel's hull seemed to absorb light, and tendrils of pure darkness writhed around its edges like living shadows. "Because 3 days ago, one of these appeared near the Rigel system," she said, "a Shadow Lord vessel supposedly extinct for 15 years. The local defense fleet engaged it, and 12 ships were consumed before it retreated back into whatever dimension it came from." Marcus stared at the image, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the station's climate control. He recognized the ship's configuration. the way the dark energy swirled around its hull. During the war, he had seen dozens of similar vessels, each one capable of consuming entire planets and converting their mass into void energy. One ship, he said carefully, could be a remnant, something that was trapped in dimensional space when the void core collapsed. Could be, Voss agreed. Except that our deep space monitoring stations have detected similar dimensional disturbances in 17 different sectors over the past month. Whatever you did to end the war, it might not have been as permanent as everyone hoped. The weight of those words settled over Marcus like a familiar burden. He had always known that the victory over the Shadow Lords might be temporary. The Void Core had been the heart of their power, but it had also been a gateway to something larger, something that existed outside normal space-time. When he had destabilized it, he had hoped to seal that gateway permanently. Even if that's true, Marcus said, what does it have to do with me? I'm just a mechanic. Voss deactivated the projector and leaned against his workbench. Because you're the only being in the galaxy who has ever successfully penetrated Shadow Lord defenses. You're the only one who understands their technology well enough to destroy it. If they're coming back, we need someone who knows how to stop them. Marcus turned back to his work, using the familiar motions of calibrating quantum fields to steady his thoughts. For 15 years, he had lived with the knowledge that his victory might not last forever. The Shadow Lords existed outside normal reality, feeding on the dimensional barriers that separated different planes of existence. Destroying the Void Core had severed their access to this galaxy, but it hadn't destroyed them. The Council has resources, Voss continued. We could give you a ship, a crew, access to the most advanced technology in the galaxy. You wouldn't have to face this alone like you did during the war. I didn't face it alone, Marcus said quietly. I had a ship full of brave people who followed me into certain death because they believed it was the right thing to do. Most of them didn't come back. The memory hit him like a physical blow. Captain Torres, who had volunteered to pilot the assault shuttle even though the mission was essentially suicide. Dr. Yamato, who had stayed behind to manually stabilize the quantum torpedoes while the ship was being torn apart around her. Lieutenant Rodriguez, barely 20 years old, who had held the dimensional anchor in place with his bare hands while Marcus worked to destabilize the Void Core. Their sacrifice meant something, Voss said gently. The galaxy has had 15 years of peace because of what you and your crew did. But if the Shadow Lords are returning, that peace is in danger. Marcus finished his calibrations and powered down the diagnostic equipment. Through the shop's window, he could see the normal bustle of station life continuing. Merchants hawking their wares, families traveling between levels, children playing in the small parks built into the station's residential sections. All of it was possible because the Shadow Lords were gone. You said someone was asking questions about me, he said. Who? Voss hesitated before answering. We're not entirely sure. The queries came through several layers of encrypted relays, but they were asking about classified information, technical specifications for the weapons you used, details about the assault on the Shadow Emperor's fortress, even requests for genetic samples from the battle site. The implications of that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. If someone was trying to piece together the events of that final battle, they might be looking for ways to either replicate his success or counter it. Given the timing with the Shadow Lord sightings, the possibilities were all troubling. I need time to think, Marcus said. Voss nodded and placed a small device on his workbench. This is a secure communicator. When you're ready to talk, activate it. But don't wait too long. If the Shadow Lords are really returning, every day we delay gives them more time to establish a foothold in our reality. After she left, Marcus closed his shop early and retreated to his small apartment on level 45. The space was Spartan, containing only the basic necessities and a few mementos from his time in the colonial fleet. He sat on his narrow bed, holding a faded photograph of his old crew taken just before their final mission. They had been so young, so confident that they could make a difference. They had believed in him when even the Galactic Council had written off humanity as a lost cause. Their trust had given him the strength to do what needed to be done, even knowing it would likely cost them all their lives. Now, 15 years later, it seemed that sacrifice might need to be made again. The question was whether he still had the strength to bear that responsibility, and whether he could ask others to follow him into darkness once more. Outside his window, the lights of New Geneva Station twinkled like stars. a reminder of the vast network of civilizations that depended on the peace he had helped secure. If the Shadow Lords were truly returning, all of those lights could be extinguished, consumed by the same hungry darkness that had once threatened to devour the entire galaxy. Marcus placed the photograph on his nightstand and picked up the communicator Voss had left. Its surface was smooth and warm to the touch, waiting for his decision. Tomorrow, he would have to choose between the quiet life he had built and the terrible responsibility he had hoped never to face again. Marcus activated the communicator at dawn, when the station's artificial sun was beginning its daily cycle. Voss answered immediately, as if she had been waiting by her own device all night. "I'll help," he said without preamble, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "I work alone until I know what we're dealing with. No council oversight, no military observers, no politicians looking over my shoulder. If the Shadow Lords are really back, they'll have learned from their previous defeat. I need to be able to adapt without explaining every decision to a committee." There was a pause before Voss responded. "The council won't like operating blind. The council can like it or find someone else. I'm not doing this so politicians can take credit or assign blame afterward. Either you trust me to do what needs to be done or you don't." "Understood. What else?" Marcus looked around his small apartment, mentally cataloging what few possessions he wanted to keep. "I need a ship. Not one of your standard council vessels. Something fast, heavily shielded, and equipped for deep space reconnaissance. And I need access to the sealed archives from the Shadow War, including the classified technical data." "That can be arranged. Anything else?" "I want to examine the site where that Shadow Lord ship appeared. If they're using the same dimensional gateway technology, there might be residual energy signatures that could tell us how they're accessing our reality." Voss agreed to his terms, and within 6 hours, Marcus found himself aboard a council transport heading for the classified shipyards in the Proxima system. The journey gave him time to review the intelligence reports Voss had provided, each one painting a grimmer picture than the last. The Shadow Lord sighting near Rigel wasn't an isolated incident. Deep space monitoring stations across the galaxy had detected similar dimensional disturbances, brief tears in spacetime that appeared and vanished within minutes. Most were too small for ships to pass through, but the frequency was increasing. Whatever the Shadow Lords were doing, they were testing the barriers between dimensions. The transport docked at Prometheus Station, a massive shipyard hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid. Marcus was met by Admiral Sarah Kim, a woman whose career had been built on studying and countering exotic threats to galactic security. "Commander Chen," she said, offering a crisp military salute that Marcus didn't return. "It's an honor to meet the man who ended the Shadow War." "I'm not a commander anymore," Marcus replied. "And I didn't end anything if they're coming back." Admiral Kim led him through the station's corridors, past construction bays where sleek warships were taking shape under robotic assembly systems. They stopped at a viewing window overlooking Bay 7, where a ship unlike anything Marcus had seen was nearing completion. "The Nightfall," Kim said, "built specifically for deep space reconnaissance in hostile dimensional environments. Quantum-shielded hull, dimensional anchor drive, and sensor arrays designed to detect Shadow Lord energy signatures." The ship was beautiful in a stark, functional way. Its hull was matte black, designed to absorb radiation across multiple spectrums, and its lines spoke of speed and stealth rather than firepower. It looked like something that could slip between dimensions without disturbing the fabric of spacetime itself. "How long?" Marcus asked. 12 hours for final systems integration. We can have you spaceworthy by tomorrow morning." Marcus nodded, already mentally planning his investigation route. The Rigel system would be his first stop, but he also wanted to visit some of the other sites where dimensional disturbances had been detected. If he could establish a pattern, he might be able to predict where the Shadow Lords would attempt their next incursion. That evening, alone in the guest quarters Admiral Kim had provided, Marcus accessed the sealed archives from the Shadow War. Reading the classified reports brought back memories he had spent 15 years trying to forget. The desperate retreat from the Vega colonies. The last stand at Alpha Centauri, where 3 entire fleets had been consumed trying to buy time for civilian evacuations. The growing desperation as system after system fell to the advancing darkness. The technical data was more useful than the historical accounts. Marcus studied the quantum signature analysis from captured Shadow Lord technology, comparing it to the recent dimensional disturbance readings. The energy patterns were similar but not identical, suggesting that the Shadow Lords had modified their dimensional manipulation techniques. One report caught his attention, a detailed analysis of the Void Core's destruction written by Dr. Elena Vasquez, the expedition's chief physicist. She had theorized that the core wasn't just a power source but a kind of dimensional anchor that kept a gateway open between the Shadow Lord's realm and normal space-time. When Marcus had destabilized it, the resulting explosion had severed that connection, trapping the Shadow Lords in their home dimension. But Vasquez had also warned that the damage might not be permanent. The dimensional barriers between realities were like a soap bubble, thin and fragile. If the Shadow Lords could find another way to puncture that barrier, they could return. The increasing frequency of dimensional disturbances suggested they were doing exactly that, probing for weak points where they could force their way through. The next morning, Marcus stood on the Nightfall's bridge as the ship undocked from Prometheus Station. The bridge was smaller than those on the warships he had commanded during the war, designed for a crew of one with automated systems handling most functions. Banks of sensors lined the walls, their displays showing the dimensional stability readings of local space. All systems green, the ship's AI announced in a neutral voice. Ready for dimensional anchor engagement. Marcus settled into the captain's chair, feeling the familiar weight of command settling around his shoulders. For 15 years he had been just Marcus the mechanic, a man whose greatest concern was fixing broken atmospheric recyclers. Now he was Commander Chen again, carrying the responsibility for the galaxy's safety. Set course for the Rigel system, he ordered. Maximum stealth approach. I want to examine that dimensional disturbance site without announcing our presence to anything that might still be watching. The Nightfall slipped away from Prometheus Station like a shadow, its quantum-dampened drive leaving barely a ripple in local spacetime. As the stars shifted to blue-white lines around them, Marcus reviewed the tactical data one more time. The Shadow Lords had always been patient, willing to spend decades positioning themselves for a single decisive strike. If they were truly returning, they would have learned from their previous defeat. This time humanity might not have the element of surprise. This time the Shadow Lords would be ready for someone like Marcus Chen. The question was whether he would be ready for them. The journey to Rigel would take 18 hours, giving him time to study the enemy he had thought he would never face again. But as the Nightfall carved its path through the dimensional foam between star systems, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was already too late. The Shadow Lords weren't just probing for weaknesses in realities, fabric. They were preparing for something much larger. Something that would make their previous invasion look like a minor skirmish in comparison. The Rigel system looked like a graveyard when Marcus arrived. Debris from the 12 destroyed ships floated in lazy orbits around the system's primary star, their twisted hulls catching the light like broken mirrors. The local defense fleet had withdrawn to the outer system, maintaining a cautious perimeter around the area where the Shadow Lord vessel had appeared. Marcus guided the Nightfall through the debris field, using the ship's advanced sensors to map the dimensional disturbance that lingered like an invisible scar in spacetime. The readings were unlike anything he had seen during the war, where previous Shadow Lord incursions had left clean dimensional tears that healed quickly. This disturbance showed signs of deliberate manipulation. Computer, analyze the dimensional stability patterns, he ordered, pulling up a 3-dimensional display of local space. Analysis complete, the AI responded. The dimensional disturbance exhibits characteristics consistent with controlled portal generation. Energy signature suggests the use of quantum stabilization technology not present in previously encountered Shadow Lord vessels. Marcus studied the data, feeling a growing sense of unease. During the war, the Shadow Lords had relied on brute force to tear holes between dimensions, creating unstable gateways that required massive amounts of energy to maintain. This new approach was more sophisticated, suggesting they had spent the past 15 years developing better technology. He maneuvered the Nightfall closer to the disturbance's epicenter, where the fabric of spacetime showed the deepest scarring. The ship's quantum shields flared as they encountered residual dimensional energy, patterns of force that existed partially outside normal reality. Warning, the computer announced. Detecting anomalous quantum fluctuations. Recommend immediate withdrawal to safe distance. Negative, Marcus replied, pushing the ship deeper into the disturbance field. Continue monitoring. Alert me if the dimensional barriers show signs of active destabilization. As the Nightfall's sensors probed the damaged space-time, Marcus began to piece together what had happened. The Shadow Lord's ship hadn't simply torn a hole between dimensions. It had created a carefully calibrated gateway that allowed for precise control over its emergence point. More troubling, the energy signatures suggested the portal could be reopened from either side. A proximity alarm interrupted his analysis. Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, the computer announced. Configuration matches Galactic Council heavy cruiser. Marcus cursed under his breath as the massive warship emerged from behind Rigel's third moon. He had specifically requested that his investigation proceed without military oversight, but apparently someone had decided to keep watch anyway. Unknown vessel. This is Captain Martinez of the Council ship Defiant, came the transmission. You are operating in a restricted area. State your identity and purpose. Marcus considered his options. He could identify himself and risk having his investigation compromised by well-meaning but inexperienced officers. Or he could attempt to evade, which would likely result in a pursuit that would disrupt the delicate dimensional environment he was trying to study. Defiant. This is Special Investigator Chen operating under Council Authorization Code Alpha 77. He replied, transmitting the credentials Voss had provided. Maintain your distance and do not interfere with my operations. There was a long pause before Captain Martinez responded. Authorization confirmed, but I have orders to provide support if requested. The dimensional readings in this area have been fluctuating since yesterday. That got Marcus's attention. Fluctuating how? Brief spikes in dimensional energy, lasting only a few seconds each. Our science officer thinks something might be probing the barrier from the other side. Marcus felt his blood turn cold. If the Shadow Lords were actively testing the dimensional boundary, it meant they were preparing for another incursion. The question was when and where they would attempt it. Captain, I need you to move your ship to the edge of the system and monitor long-range sensors, Marcus ordered. If anything tries to come through that dimensional scar, I need advance warning. Understood. But what about you? If something does come through, that little scout ship won't stand a chance against a Shadow Lord vessel. Marcus looked at the Nightfall's tactical displays, noting the minimal weapons loadout. The ship had been designed for stealth and reconnaissance, not combat. If he encountered a Shadow Lord vessel, his only option would be to run. I'll worry about that when it happens, he said. Just keep watch and be ready to relay any data I transmit to Council headquarters. He spent the next 6 hours mapping the dimensional disturbance in detail, building a three-dimensional model of how the Shadow Lords had manipulated space-time to create their gateway. The technology was far more advanced than anything they had used during the war, incorporating principles that seemed to draw on humanity's own quantum manipulation research. That realization hit him like a physical blow. The Shadow Lords were using human technology, or at least technology derived from human innovations. Somehow, they had gained access to the classified research that had led to the development of the weapons used against them. Computer, compare these dimensional manipulation patterns with archived human quantum field research from the Shadow War period. The analysis took several minutes, during which Marcus found himself gripping the armrests of his chair with white knuckles. When the results appeared on his screen, they confirmed his worst fears. Dimensional stabilization techniques show 93%. Correlation with theoretical models, developed by Dr. Elena Vasquez during classified project. Nightbridge, the computer, reported Project Nightbridge, the secret human research program that had developed the quantum torpedoes used in the assault on the Shadow Emperors. Fortress, Dr. Vasquez had theorized that it might be possible to create stable dimensional gateways using quantum field manipulation, but the project had been classified and buried after the war ended. Someone had leaked that research to the Shadow Lords. Marcus was still processing the implications when his proximity alarm screamed. Multiple dimensional disturbances detected, the computer announced. Recommend immediate evasive action. Through the Nightfall's viewports, Marcus could see space itself beginning to tear. Not one gateway, but dozens, opening simultaneously throughout the inner system. Through each rent in reality, he caught glimpses of absolute darkness punctuated by the cold gleam of Shadow Lord vessels. Defiant, this is Chen, he transmitted on the emergency channel. We have multiple Shadow Lord vessels incoming. Withdraw immediately and alert Council forces. Negative, Captain Martinez replied. We're moving to engage. Marcus watched in horror as the heavy cruiser accelerated toward the nearest dimensional gateway, its weapons charging for combat. The Defiant was a powerful ship, but he had seen entire fleets consumed by Shadow Lord vessels during the war. The first Shadow Lord ship emerged completely from its gateway, its hull drinking in the light of Rigel's star. It was larger than the vessels Marcus remembered, its design incorporating the same quantum stabilization technology evident in the gateways. As the Defiant opened fire, the Shadow Lord ship's defensive fields absorbed the energy blasts and converted them into more void energy. "Computer, plot an escape course to the edge of the system," Marcus ordered, even as he watched more Shadow Lord vessels emerging from their gateways. Maximum acceleration. But even as the nightfall turned away from the battle, Marcus knew this was just the beginning. The Shadow Lords hadn't returned to simply conquer a few star systems. They had learned from their defeat, adapted their technology, and somehow gained access to humanity's most classified research. This time, they were planning to finish what they had started 15 years ago. And Marcus was no longer sure that even humanity's legendary adaptability would be enough to stop them. Behind him, the Defiant's weapons fire grew more desperate as it found itself surrounded by ships that seemed to devour light itself. Captain Martinez's final transmission was cut short by static as the cruiser was consumed by spreading darkness. The Shadow Lords had returned, and they were stronger than ever. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the high-security chambers beneath Geneva Station, the same levels where Marcus had once operated his small repair shop. Representatives from 47 different species filled the circular chamber, their faces, or their species equivalent, showing various degrees of fear and disbelief. Marcus stood at the center of the chamber, still wearing the flight suit he had worn during his escape from the Rigel system 18 hours earlier. Holographic displays around him showed the tactical data from the Shadow Lord incursion, each image more sobering than the last. 17 dimensional gateways opened simultaneously, he reported, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. Shadow Lord vessels emerged through each one, using quantum stabilization technology that allowed for precise control over their arrival coordinates. This was not a random attack, it was a coordinated invasion. Chancellor Vextar, the elderly Centaurian who led the council, leaned forward in his hover chair. "You're certain these were genuine Shadow Lord vessels? Not some kind of elaborate deception?" Marcus activated another display, showing detailed scans of the enemy ships. The dimensional signatures are unmistakable, but their technology has advanced significantly since the war. They're incorporating quantum manipulation techniques that were classified human research during the conflict. A murmur ran through the assembled representatives. The Tellurian delegate, Ambassador Zeph, spoke up in her species' whistling language. How is such a thing possible? All Shadow War research was classified at the highest levels. Someone leaked it to them, Marcus said bluntly, either deliberately or through captured intelligence. The Shadow Lords now have access to theoretical frameworks that could allow them to create stable dimensional gateways anywhere in the galaxy. The implications of that statement sent a chill through the chamber. During the original Shadow War, the enemy had been limited to a few massive gateway points that could be predicted and defended. If they could now open portals anywhere, no system in the galaxy would be safe. Director Voss, representing the Council's intelligence services, activated her own display. Our deep space monitoring network has detected dimensional fluctuations in 73 different sectors over the past 24 hours. Most are too small for ship passage, but they appear to be testing probes. They're mapping our dimensional topology, Marcus realized, looking for weak points where they can establish permanent gateways. Chancellor Vexitar's head crest drooped with exhaustion. How long do we have before they can mount a full invasion? Marcus studied the tactical data, running calculations in his head based on what he knew of Shadow Lord technology and tactics. If they maintain their current rate of dimensional probing, they'll have mapped the entire local galactic cluster within 2 weeks. After that, they can open gateways wherever they choose. Then we must strike first, declared General Corthan, the massive reptilian commander of the Council's military forces. Assemble the fleet and attack their staging areas before they can complete their preparations. We don't know where their staging areas are, Marcus pointed out. They're operating from outside our dimensional framework, We can't attack what we can't reach. Then what do you suggest? Chancellor Vextar asked. You're the only being in this chamber who has successfully fought the Shadow Lords before. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, remembering the desperate final battle that had ended the war. He had penetrated the Shadow Emperor's fortress not through superior firepower, but by understanding the fundamental principles that governed their technology. The same approach might work again, but it would require resources and cooperation on a scale that the Fractured Council had never managed. We need to understand their new technology, he said finally. If they're using modified human quantum manipulation techniques, then we need to figure out how they've adapted them. That means capturing a Shadow Lord vessel intact. The chamber erupted in shocked voices from dozens of species. The idea of deliberately engaging Shadow Lord vessels for capture rather than destruction went against every tactical doctrine developed during the war. That's suicide, General Corthan growled. Shadow Lord ships consume everything they touch. You're talking about getting close enough to board one of those things. Not board, Marcus corrected. Disable. If we can disrupt their dimensional anchor systems while they're partially phased into our reality, we might be able to trap one in normal space-time where we can study it. Ambassador Zeph's whistle song carried notes of disbelief. The risk is enormous. If the attempt fails, you would be providing them with advanced council vessels to study and reverse engineer. Marcus nodded grimly. It's a calculated risk, but if we don't understand their new capabilities, we'll be fighting blind when they launch their main invasion. During the original war, humanity survived because we learned to adapt faster than they could. That advantage is gone if they already understand our technology better than we understand theirs. Director Voss pulled up intelligence reports on her display. Our analysis suggests they're currently operating with a limited number of vessels, probably an advanced scouting force. If we're going to attempt a capture operation, it should be soon, before they bring through reinforcements. What would you need? Chancellor Vextar asked. Marcus considered the requirements. A fast strike force equipped with quantum disruption weapons, ships capable of coordinated dimensional manipulation, and a crew trained in exotic physics operations. Human crews, General Corthan observed. You're talking about human technology and human tactics. Other species don't have the same intuitive understanding of quantum field manipulation. That was true, though Marcus hadn't wanted to state it so directly. Humans had developed their quantum manipulation capabilities out of desperate necessity during the war, pushing theoretical physics to its breaking point. Other species had more conservative approaches to dimensional science, which made them less effective at the kind of improvised field modifications the mission would require. I'll need volunteers, Marcus said. People who understand the risks and are willing to face them anyway. You'll have them, came a voice from the gallery above the main chamber floor. Marcus looked up to see a group of humans in military uniforms led by a woman with Admiral's insignia. Admiral Sarah Kim, Prometheus Fleet. I think I can speak for the entire human contingent when I say we're ready to finish what we started. The other human officers nodded agreement, their faces showing the same determination Marcus remembered from the war. They were younger than his original crew, but they carried themselves with the confidence of people who had grown up hearing stories of humanity's greatest victory. Chancellor Vextar looked around the chamber, gauging the mood of the other delegates. If the humans are willing to undertake this mission, the Council will provide whatever support we can. But understand that if this fails, the Shadow Lords will have gained valuable intelligence about our capabilities. If we don't try, Marcus replied, they'll overrun the galaxy anyway. At least this way we have a chance to learn something useful before the main invasion begins. The session continued for several more hours as they planned the details of the operation. Marcus would lead a strike force of 6 human vessels, each equipped with experimental quantum disruption weapons based on Shadow War research. They would target the next Shadow Lord probe, attempting to disable rather than destroy the enemy vessel. As the representatives filed out of the chamber, Admiral Kim approached Marcus. I wanted you to know that Captain Rodriguez's daughter volunteered for the mission. Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez, Quantum Systems Specialist. Marcus felt a sharp pang of memory. Lieutenant Rodriguez had been barely 20 when he died holding the dimensional anchor steady during the assault on the Shadow Emperor's fortress. Now his daughter was volunteering for another desperate mission against the same enemy. She doesn't have to prove anything, Marcus said quietly. She's not trying to prove anything, Admiral Kim replied. She wants to finish her father's fight. Same as all of us. That evening, Marcus returned to his abandoned repair shop on level 47. The space looked exactly as he had left it. Tools still scattered on his workbench. A half-repaired atmospheric recycler sitting in the corner. It seemed like a lifetime ago that his greatest concern had been calibrating quantum field generators for civilian equipment. He picked up the faded photograph of his old crew, studying their young faces in the dim light. They had believed in him when the mission seemed impossible, following him into the heart of the Shadow Emperor's fortress because they trusted his judgment. Now he was asking a new generation to make the same sacrifice. The communicator Director Voss had given him chimed softly. When he activated it, Admiral Kim's face appeared in the holographic display. The strike force will be ready in 12 hours, she reported. 6 ships, 60 crew members, all volunteers. We've equipped each vessel with quantum disruption torpedoes based on your original designs. Any word on where the next probe will appear? Marcus asked. Deep space monitoring detected dimensional fluctuations near the Vega system 3 hours ago. If the pattern holds, they'll attempt a full probe within 18 hours. Vega, the first system to fall during T. The strike force assembled at the edge of the Vega system, like a constellation of predators waiting for their prey. 6 sleek vessels hung in formation around Marcus's flagship, the Retribution, each one bristling with experimental quantum disruption weapons. The ships represented the pinnacle of human engineering, designed specifically for fighting enemies that existed partially outside normal reality. Marcus stood on the Retribution's bridge, watching the tactical displays as his crew made final preparations for the ambush. Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez worked at the quantum systems console, her fingers dancing across controls with the same intuitive understanding her father had possessed. Seeing her there brought back painful memories, but also a sense of continuity that strengthened his resolve. All ships report ready, announced Commander Hayes, the strike force's tactical coordinator. Dimensional sensors are active and monitoring for gateway manifestations. Remember, Marcus addressed the fleet through the communication system. Our objective is capture, not destruction. We need one of their ships intact enough to study. That means precise timing and perfect coordination. The response came back from 6 captains who had volunteered for what everyone knew was likely a suicide mission. Understood, sir. We're ready. Marcus settled into his command chair, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling around his shoulders. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. When the Shadow Lord probe ship emerged from its dimensional gateway, the strike force would use concentrated quantum disruption beams to destabilize its dimensional anchor. In theory, this would trap the vessel in normal spacetime where conventional weapons could disable its systems without destroying it. In practice, they would be trying to capture a ship that could consume matter itself and convert it into void energy. Contact, Lieutenant Rodriguez announced suddenly. Dimensional disturbance bearing 0 Mark 7. Gateway formation in progress. Marcus watched as space itself began to tear in the distance, the familiar sight of reality coming apart at the seams. But this gateway was different from those he remembered from the war. Instead of the chaotic dimensional wounds the Shadow Lords had once created, this portal opened with mathematical precision, its edges perfectly stable. They've definitely improved their technology, Commander Hayes observed grimly. The Shadow Lord vessel that emerged was unlike anything from the archives. Where the old ships had been organic-looking things of flowing darkness, this one showed clear geometric design principles. Its hull was still the light-absorbing black of void energy, but it incorporated angular sections that spoke of advanced engineering. All ships, initiate quantum disruption sequence, Marcus ordered. Target the dimensional anchor points there, where the hull phases in and out of normal space. 6 beams of concentrated quantum energy lanced out from the human ships, each one calibrated to interfere with the exotic matter that allowed Shadow Lord vessels to exist between dimensions. For a moment, Marcus thought the plan would work perfectly. Then the Shadow Lord ship did something impossible. It adapted. Disruption beams are being absorbed, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported in shock. The target vessel is converting our quantum energy into additional dimensional stability. Marcus stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The Shadow Lords had not only learned from their previous defeat, They had specifically developed countermeasures against human quantum manipulation technology. They had been studying humanity's weapons for 15 years, preparing for exactly this kind of encounter. All ships, break off and prepare for evasive maneuvers, he ordered, but it was already too late. The Shadow Lord vessel turned its attention to the nearest human ship, the cruiser Valiant. Tendrils of pure darkness reached out from its hull, not to destroy the ship but to envelop it. Marcus watched in horror as the Valiant's hull began to phase in and out of reality, caught between dimensions. "This is Captain Torres of the Valiant," came the desperate transmission. "Hull integrity failing. They're pulling us into dimensional space, attempting emergency quantum burst." The Valiant's final act was to overload its quantum core, creating a brief but intense disruption in local space-time. The Shadow Lord vessel released its grip on the human ship, but the damage was done. The Valiant had been converted into something that existed partially outside normal reality, its crew trapped in a dimensional prison. "New contacts," Commander Hayes announced grimly. "Multiple dimensional gateways opening throughout the system." Marcus counted 12 new tiers in spacetime as additional Shadow Lord vessels began emerging. This wasn't a probe, it was a trap. They had been waiting for humanity to reveal its new capabilities, studying the human response to plan their countermeasures. "All ships, emergency withdrawal," Marcus ordered. "Maximum acceleration to the edge of the system." But even as the surviving human vessels turned to flee, Marcus realized the true scope of what they were facing. The Shadow Lords hadn't just returned with better technology. They had been planning this moment for 15 years. Every tactical innovation humanity had developed since the war, every new weapon and defensive system, had been anticipated and countered. "Sir," Lieutenant Rodriguez called out, her voice tight with fear, "I'm detecting dimensional anchor points throughout the system. They're not just bringing through ships, they're establishing a permanent gateway complex." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. The Shadow Lords weren't planning to invade the galaxy, they were planning to annex it. The dimensional gateway complex would allow them to bring their entire fleet through from their home dimension, bypassing the barriers that had kept them trapped for 15 years. "Get me a connection to Council headquarters," he ordered. "Priority Alpha encryption." Director Voss's face appeared on the communication screen moments later, her expression grim as she took in the tactical situation behind Marcus. "How bad is it?" "Worse than we imagined," Marcus replied. "They've been studying us for 15 years, developing specific countermeasures to our technology. And they're not just probing, they're building something. A permanent dimensional anchor that could bring through their entire fleet. How long do we have?" Marcus looked at the sensor readings showing the expanding network of dimensional gateways. Based on the rate of expansion, maybe 72 hours before the gateway complex is stable enough for a full invasion. "What do you need?" The question hung in the air as Marcus considered their options. The original plan to capture a Shadow Lord vessel was now impossible. They had adapted their technology specifically to prevent such attempts. But there might be another way, one that would require the same kind of desperate gamble that had ended the first Shadow War. "I need access to the Project Nightbridge archives," he said finally. "All of them, including the theoretical frameworks that were never implemented. That research was classified for good reasons. Some of those theories could destabilize entire star systems if implemented incorrectly. The Shadow Lords are using modified versions of our own quantum manipulation technology against us," Marcus explained. "If we're going to stop them, we need to understand how they've adapted it. That means going back to the original theoretical foundations and finding approaches they haven't anticipated." Director Voss was quiet for a moment, weighing the risks. "I'll authorize access to the archives. But Marcus, if this goes wrong, we could end up destroying ourselves before the Shadow Lords get the chance. If we don't try, they'll destroy the galaxy anyway," Marcus replied. "At least this way we go down fighting." As the communication ended, Marcus looked around the bridge at his crew. They were young, most of them born after the original Shadow War, but they carried themselves with the same determination he remembered from his first crew. They understood the stakes, and they were ready to face whatever came next. The strike force limped away from the Vega system, carrying with them the knowledge that the galaxy's greatest nightmare was returning. But they also carried something else, the stubborn human refusal to surrender even when facing impossible odds. The Second Shadow War had begun, and humanity was already losing. But as long as humans like Lieutenant Rodriguez were willing to fight, the darkness would not win easily. Marcus stood in the deepest laboratory beneath Prometheus Station, surrounded by quantum field generators that hummed with barely contained energy. The Project Nightbridge archives floated in holographic displays around him. 15 years of theoretical research that had been deemed too dangerous to implement. Dr. Elena Vasquez's final equations filled the air like three-dimensional poetry, describing mathematical relationships that could reshape reality itself. "Are you certain about this?" Admiral Kim asked from the observation gallery above. Through the reinforced transparent aluminum, she watched Marcus work with an expression of deep concern. The quantum cascade calculations suggest a 70% chance of dimensional collapse. "The Shadow Lords are using our own technology against us," Marcus replied, not looking up from the equation he was modifying. "Their dimensional anchor network draws on principles from Project Nightbridge. If we can create a quantum resonance cascade that targets those specific mathematical relationships, we might be able to destabilize their entire gateway complex." Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had volunteered to assist despite the risks, looked up from her own calculations. "The power requirements are enormous. We'd need to channel the output of an entire star through the quantum field generators." "That's what these are for," Marcus said, indicating the massive installations around them. Each generator was the size of a small building, designed to manipulate fundamental forces on a scale previously thought impossible. During the war, Dr. Vasquez theorized that it might be possible to create a quantum field that would resonate across dimensional boundaries. She never had the resources to test it, because testing it could have torn a hole in space-time itself, Admiral Kim pointed out. Marcus finally looked up from his work, his face showing the strain of the past 48 hours. "The Shadow Lords have been building their gateway network for 3 days. Our latest intelligence reports show dimensional disturbances in over 200 star systems. In another 24 hours, they'll have enough anchor points to bring through their main fleet." The room fell silent as everyone contemplated what that meant. During the original Shadow War, humanity had faced a few dozen Shadow Lord vessels and had barely survived. If the enemy could bring through their entire fleet, potentially thousands of ships, no force in the galaxy could stop them. "The quantum resonance cascade is our only option," Marcus continued. "If we can target the mathematical foundation of their dimensional anchor technology, we might be able to collapse their entire network simultaneously." "And if it doesn't work?" Admiral Kim asked. "Then we've lost nothing but time," Marcus replied. "Because if the main fleet comes through, the war will be over before it begins." Director Voss's voice crackled through the communication system. "Marcus, we're receiving reports from the front lines. The Shadow Lords have begun limited probing attacks on Council border systems. They're testing our response capabilities while they finish building their gateway network." Marcus felt the familiar weight of command settling around his shoulders. Somewhere out there, brave beings were dying while he worked on theoretical equations in a laboratory. But if the quantum resonance cascade worked, their sacrifice might save the entire galaxy. "How much longer do you need?" Admiral Kim asked. Marcus studied the equations floating around him, checking and rechecking the mathematical relationships that could either save or doom them all. 6 hours to complete the calculations. Another 12 to configure the quantum field generators. "We don't have 18 hours, Director Voss interrupted. Long-range sensors have detected massive dimensional disturbances near the galactic core. The Shadow Lords are beginning to move their main fleet into position." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the pressure of an entire galaxy's survival weighing on his decisions. During the first Shadow War, he had been able to rely on improvisation and the element of surprise. This time everything depended on pure mathematics and precise engineering. "We'll have to cut corners," he decided. "Configure the generators based on the preliminary calculations and refine the equations as we go. It's risky, but it's better than letting them complete their invasion preparations." Lieutenant Rodriguez looked up from her console, her face pale. "Sir, I'm detecting quantum fluctuations in the dimensional barriers around this system." "I think they've noticed our preparations." Through the laboratory's sensors, Marcus could see space itself beginning to ripple near the outer edge of the Proxima system. The Shadow Lords were sending scouts to investigate the massive quantum fields being generated by the Project Nightbridge installation. All defensive fleets, "Move to intercept," Admiral Kim ordered through the station's communication system. "Do not allow enemy vessels to approach the laboratory complex." Marcus watched through the external monitors as human warships moved to form a defensive perimeter around Prometheus Station. But he knew that if the Shadow Lords brought enough force to bear, the defenders wouldn't be able to hold them off for long. "Start the generator initialization sequence," he told Lieutenant Rodriguez. "We're running out of time." The quantum field generators began their activation cycle, their deep humming rising to a resonance that seemed to shake the very foundations of reality. Around the laboratory, holographic displays showed the mathematical framework that would either save the galaxy or destroy it. "This is insane," Admiral Kim muttered, but she didn't order him to stop. "Insanity is what makes us human," Marcus replied, making final adjustments to the quantum field equations. "The Shadow Lords think they understand us because they've studied our technology, but they've never understood the most important thing about humanity. We're willing to risk everything on an impossible gamble if it means protecting the people we care about." The first explosions came as Shadow Lord scouts engaged the defensive fleet at the edge of the system. Through the tactical displays, Marcus could see the familiar sight of human ships disappearing into expanding voids as they were consumed by enemy vessels. But the defenders held their positions, buying precious time for the quantum cascade preparation. "Generators at 60% power," Lieutenant Rodriguez reported. "Quantum field stability is holding within acceptable parameters." Marcus felt a surge of hope. Dr. Vasquez's equations were working, creating a resonance pattern that could reach across dimensional boundaries. If his calculations were correct, the cascade would propagate through the quantum foam that connected all points in spacetime, targeting the specific mathematical relationships that the Shadow Lords use to anchor their gateways in normal reality. "Contact," came the warning from the defensive fleet. "Multiple Shadow Lord vessels incoming. They're bringing heavy assault ships." Through the monitors, Marcus could see the massive enemy vessels emerging from dimensional gateways throughout the system. These weren't the scouts they had faced before. These were warships designed to crush organized resistance. The human defenders were outnumbered 10-1. "Generators at 80%, Lieutenant Rodriguez announced, her voice tight with concentration. "Quantum cascade preparation will be complete in 90 seconds. Marcus made the final calibrations to the resonance pattern, his hands steady despite the explosions visible through the laboratory windows. Everything depended on the next few moments. Either the cascade would work and cripple the Shadow Lord invasion, or it would fail and leave the galaxy defenseless. "Generators at full power," Lieutenant Rodriguez reported. "Quantum cascade ready to deploy." Marcus looked around the laboratory one last time, at the equations that represented humanity's best hope for survival. Then he reached for the activation control, knowing that this single decision would determine the fate of countless worlds. "For everyone who didn't make it home," he said quietly, thinking of Captain Torres, Dr. Yamato, Lieutenant Rodriguez, and all the others who had sacrificed themselves in humanity's darkest hour. He pressed the control. The quantum cascade erupted outward from Prometheus Station like an invisible tsunami, racing through the dimensional barriers that separated realities. Across the galaxy, Shadow Lord gateway complexes suddenly found themselves trying to maintain anchor points based on mathematical relationships that no longer existed. One by one, the dimensional gateways began to collapse, trapping the enemy fleet in their home dimension. The Shadow Lords had spent 15 years preparing for humanity's return, but they had never understood the most important lesson from the First War. Humans didn't just adapt to impossible situations, they changed the rules entirely. Marcus watched through the sensors as the enemy vessels in the Proxima system were pulled back through collapsing gateways, their invasion plans shattered by equations written in a laboratory beneath an asteroid. The galaxy was safe, at least for now. But as he looked at Lieutenant Rodriguez's proud smile, Marcus knew that this victory, like the last one, was only temporary. Somewhere in the darkness between dimensions, the Shadow Lords would be studying this new defeat, planning their next return. When that time came, humanity would be ready. They always were.